She pointed her finger and shouted at him on live television. In front of 57 million viewers, a legendary 81-year-old American judge accused a young African president of disrespecting the law. But within minutes, the narrative flipped. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't retaliate. Instead, with calm precision, Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, asked a single question that shattered decades of courtroom bravado. In a moment that would ignite headlines across Africa news outlets and dominate online spaces, the question echoed louder than any argument. If justice is truly blind, why does it always see race first? This moment wasn't about drama. It was about clarity. The clip exploded, going viral in 24 hours. But more importantly, it did something far rarer. It made people stop, think, reflect. Today we revisit that moment, not to stir controversy, but to examine what happens when the softest voice speaks the loudest truth. Are you ready to reconsider what justice really means? It was meant to be just another televised debate. A routine exchange between two prominent figures under polished studio lights. Yet that evening would rewrite everything. The stage was CNN's primetime panel, elegant decor, a seasoned moderator, an audience curated for polite applause. On paper, nothing seemed unusual, but reality was about to fracture the script. On one side, Judge Judy, age 81, stern, revered, and unyielding. To millions, she embodied justice, consequence, and moral authority, especially among older viewers who saw in her a voice of reason. On the other, Ibrahim Traoré, age 37, president of Burkina Faso, trained in law, forged in struggle, a man shaped not by privilege but by principle. His quiet entrance contrasted starkly with the judge's commanding air, no entourage, no grand gestures, just presence. What made this clash so magnetic wasn't hostility, it was symbolism. One represented decades of American courtroom culture. The other carried the conscience of post-colonial Africa. The moderator posed the topic, global criminal justice reform. At first the tone was warm, even playful. But one question changed everything. Mr. President, he asked, you've spoken of systemic injustice. Do you believe it's a global issue? What followed was not a speech, but a lesson. And just like that, the tension shifted. How often do we see youth and wisdom collide, not in arrogance, but in truth? He didn't shout. He didn't interrupt. He didn't accuse. When Judge Judy raised her voice and pointed her finger across the stage, expecting resistance, Ibrahim Traoré simply paused. He let silence do what noise never could. Force people to listen. Then, with the calm of a surgeon and the certainty of lived experience, he asked the one question that dismantled decades of judicial pride. Your Honor, in all your years on the bench, have you ever asked why the same communities keep ending up in your courtroom? The studio froze. The audience leaned in. Even Judge Judy didn't reply. Not right away. Her certainty cracked. Her expression shifted. It was not rage but doubt. And in that moment, it became clear this wasn't a debate. It was an awakening. Ibrahim Traoré, with the weight of Burkina Faso's history behind him, exposed something the American public wasn't used to hearing from a foreign leader. He didn't shame her. He didn't gloat. He asked, with surgical empathy, if justice had ever truly been blind, or merely selective. This wasn't about one courtroom. This was about every courtroom. He spoke not for applause, but for the unheard. His question wasn't an attack. It was a mirror, and sometimes mirrors hurt. What happens when a young African leader walks into the house of Western justice and calmly redefines its foundation? That's a question worth asking, again and again. The moment Judge Judy finally responded, it wasn't with authority, it was with instinct. Because they commit more crimes, she said, her voice flat, definitive. But the room didn't applaud, they didn't nod. Something had shifted. It wasn't just the answer, it was how confidently she gave it. No reflection, no pause. Just decades of certainty poured into a single sentence. But that certainty met a wall named Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't argue, he didn't flinch. He simply let the silence speak for itself, and then added, if justice is blind, why does it always seem to see race before evidence? There were no camera cuts, no dramatic music. Just a courtroom set on a talk show stage that was no longer entertainment. It was testimony, and that testimony landed like a thunderclap. What Traoré did next wasn't a monologue. It was memory. He spoke of watching his father get dragged out of their home in Burkina Faso, not for what he did, but for what he looked like. A schoolteacher beaten in the street for resembling someone with no power. The audience didn't shift in their seats. They were nailed to them. What was happening on stage wasn't a political stunt. It was a transfer of moral weight. As Africa News later called it, a rare case of truth disarming the powerful. And maybe the most haunting question Traore posed was this: what if the justice you defend was never meant to include all of us? Would you dare to ask that out loud? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was transformational. Judge Judy sat still, but the confidence that had defined her presence began to erode. Her fingers tapped not out of command but hesitation. Then came her rebuttal. Statistics can be twisted any way you want. She said with a scoff, I don't need a spreadsheet to tell me what I've seen with my own eyes. A few audience members chuckled, uncertain, uneasy. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't debate with her facts. He brought his own. Black men in America serve 19% longer sentences than white men for the same crimes, he said calmly. And that's not opinion. That's the U.S. Department of Justice. He wasn't grandstanding. He was educating, with facts, not fury. He cited the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, a policy that disproportionately punished black communities. He pointed out how this wasn't ancient history, but modern law. West Africa News later said, this wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. And perhaps the most vital lesson, that when someone speaks with truth and dignity, it isn't volume that moves the world, it's clarity. If you were in that room, would you have listened or defended what you were taught? What happened next turned a moment into a movement. The clip of Ibrahim Traoré asking, if justice is blind, why does it always seem to see race first, exploded across the internet. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 57 million times. But it wasn't just the views, it was the way people responded. From TikTok to YouTube, educators, lawyers, and even retired judges began sharing the moment. Law students paused the video frame by frame, breaking down Traoré's words like scripture. At Howard University, students hosted an open mic night to share their own experiences of being silenced, and finally heard. Angela Davis, civil rights icon, said on NPR, he didn't confront her with anger, he confronted her with dignity, and that's what made the world stop. Us Africa News called it a cultural shift, and us Burkina Faso erupted in pride. Murals of Traoré, head bowed, hands folded, appeared in Ouagadougou. Below them, he did not shout, he simply told the truth. And ask yourself, when the truth speaks softly, do we still listen? In the days that followed, the ripples became waves. Articles poured in from major outlets, The Atlantic, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, even Forbes. All of them praised not just the message of Ibrahim Traoré, but the manner in which he delivered it. No shouting, no insults, just facts and lived truth. West Africa News dubbed it the most composed dismantling of legal illusion ever aired. In Burkina Faso, university professors started using the video in ethics and justice courses. On Twitter, a single clip of Traoré's line, "Justice should never see skin before it sees evidence," was shared by both conservative and liberal voices. It resonated not because it was partisan, but because it was undeniable. Students in Nairobi painted the quote on school walls. Activists in South Africa called it quiet revolution. Political analysts in the US called it a reckoning we weren't ready for. And perhaps the most powerful legacy, it made people question, not what justice is, but what justice has become. So we ask again, is justice still blind, or has it just been closing its eyes? In the end, this was never about one man silencing another. It was about how truth, when spoken with clarity not cruelty, can disarm the loudest legacy. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, didn't defeat Judge Judy. He didn't shame her. He stood firm in a truth forged from injustice, and let the silence that followed do what shouting never could. This wasn't about politics. It wasn't just about race. It was about courage, the kind that sits quietly across from power and refuses to flinch. It was, in the most unexpected way, a masterclass in Africa News, storytelling grounded, global, human. Now, the moment belongs to all of us, and so does the question it leaves behind when the time comes to speak. Not to shout, not to argue, but to speak. Will we? And if we do, will we be ready to say something that matters? Share this story. Ask the questions. Spread the truth. Because if silence has power, then so does your voice. This story has traveled far beyond a TV studio. It now lives in classrooms, in courtrooms, and in conversations happening across the world. It forces us to ask, what kind of justice are we building for the next generation? Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso, did not simply respond to injustice. He educated millions. He modeled what leadership looks like when it is grounded in truth, not volume. When it listens before it speaks. In a time of noise, his silence taught. In a culture of performance, his calm presence broke through. And that's why this moment matters. It's not just a viral clip, it's a living case study. For teachers, it's a lesson in empathy. For students, a reminder that voice matters. For leaders, a challenge to choose substance over spectacle. So ask yourself, what will you do with this moment? Will you share it? Teach it? Reflect on it? Will you challenge your own assumptions and listen more deeply? Because Asara's Africa News doesn't just report what happened. It reminds us why it matters and what we can do next. Justice is not a moment, it's a movement.